Okay, just think about this for a second. You've got to create one set of rules, a single governing framework for one of the most incredibly diverse nations on the planet. I mean, we're talking hundreds of languages, countless cultures, a whole tapestry of religions, and they all have to work together as one country. That was the huge challenge facing India's founders. So let's dive in and see how on earth they pulled it off. And really, this isn't just some abstract question. It's the core problem the Indian Constitution was designed to solve. How do you create a blueprint that's strong enough to keep things stable, but also flexible enough to handle just unimaginable diversity? And, of course, change over time. So where did a document this massive even come from?
Well, it certainly didn't just appear out of thin air. The Constitution was really the grand finale of a long, long freedom struggle, the Indian national movement. That's where the seeds of self-rule were planted. This all led to the Constituent Assembly kicking off in 1946. And you have to picture this. It was a group of some of the most brilliant minds of the time, and they debated every single clause for almost 3 years. Finally, in 1950, the blueprint was ready, and the Republic of India was officially born. All right, so in this explainer, we're going to break that blueprint right down. We'll look at its core philosophy, then the three main pillars of power, how power is shared in the federal system, the engine that drive the democracy, and finally, the guardians who make sure the whole thing keeps running smoothly.
Okay, so let's jump into our first section, the blueprint itself. What are the core ideas, the philosophy that's the bedrock for every single law and institution in India? Well, it all kicks off with the very first words of the document.
Those first words are just so powerful. We, the people. Right from the get-go, this tells you the ultimate authority, the power, comes from the citizens themselves, not from some king or ruler. And then look at the huge promises that follow. Sovereign, that means India is its own boss. Secular, meaning the government stays neutral on religion. And democratic republic, that's the big one. It means the people elect their own government. These are not just fancy words. They are the absolute core commitments of the nation. So what are the big goals here? Well, if you boil it all down, the Constitution is really aiming for three main things. First, a strong, healthy democracy where the people have the power. Second, and this is crucial, social change. The idea was to break free from the old inequalities of the past. And third, national unity. I mean, how do you weave all that diversity into one strong nation? These three ideas are like a common thread running through the entire Constitution. And the Constitution delivers on these promises in two really interesting ways. On one side, you've got your fundamental rights. Think of these as your personal shield. They are rock-solid guarantees, like freedom of speech or equality, that are legally enforceable. The government absolutely cannot take them away from you. Then, on the other side, you have the directive principles. These are more like the nation's to-do list or a moral compass for the government. They're aspirations, things like providing a decent wage for everyone or protecting the environment. Now, you can't sue the government for not achieving them, but they are the fundamental goals that every government is supposed to be working towards. All right, so we've got the philosophy down, but how does the government actually get structured to make all this happen? Well, this brings us to the three big pillars of power that run the nation. At its most basic level, it's a pretty clear separation of powers. You've got the legislature, their job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive, their job is to implement those laws, to put them into action. And finally, you have the judiciary, which interprets the laws to make sure they're being followed correctly and that they stick to the Constitution. So, make, implement, interpret. It's a classic setup for a very good reason. So who are the key players in each of these pillars? Well, the legislature is the parliament. For the executive, you have the president as the head of state, but the real day-to-day power is with the prime minister and their team of ministers. And the judiciary? That's headed up by the Supreme Court with the high courts in the states just below it. These are the institutions that are running the country, day in and day out. But here's the most important part. These pillars don't just work in their own little bubbles. The whole system is built on a really intricate web of checks and balances to keep everyone in line. For example, the judiciary has the power to look at a law passed by the legislature and say, nope, this goes against the Constitution, and strike it down. That's called judicial review. It's a perfect example of how the system makes sure that no single branch gets too powerful. Okay, so that's the main structure at the national level. But of course, India isn't just one central government. It's a huge union of states. So that begs the question, how is power actually shared between the central government in New Delhi and all the different state governments? And that's where this idea of federalism comes into play. Basically, the Constitution lays out clear lists of who does what. The central government takes care of the big national stuff, like defense and foreign policy. The states handle more local issues like policing and agriculture. And then there are some things, like education, where they both have a say. But what's really unique about India's model is that it's designed with a very strong central government, which gives it a lot of sway.
That strong center is pretty clear, but you might notice something else here. The state powers aren't all equal. This points to a really key feature called asymmetrical federalism. All that means is that not every state has the exact same deal with the central government. For instance, some states, particularly in the Northeast, have special provisions built in to protect their unique cultures and histories. It's another layer of flexibility baked right into the blueprint.
So we've got the blueprint, we've got the structures, but what's the engine that makes this whole machine run? Well, in a democracy, the answer is always the same: the vote. And that brings us to the absolute engine room of the entire system, the Indian electoral process. Look, conducting an election in India is, without a doubt, the single biggest democratic event on the entire planet. It's just a mind-bogglingly huge task, and it's all managed by the Independent Election Commission. They set the rules, they set the schedule, then of course the parties campaign, hundreds of millions of people go out to vote, and at the end of it all, the results tell us who gets to form the next government. It's incredibly complex, but it is truly the heartbeat of the republic. Okay, so last but definitely not least, how do you make sure this whole massive system, the government, the officials, all of it, stays transparent and accountable? To do that, the Constitution created a special set of independent watchdogs. You can think of them as the guardians of the system.
And here are just a few of the big ones. You've got the Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, who is basically the government's financial auditor, making sure taxpayer money is spent properly. You have the National Human Rights Commission, the NHRC, which looks into any violations of human rights. And then you have a number of commissions dedicated to protecting the rights of specific groups, like scheduled castes and tribes, women, and minorities. Each one is designed to be a check on the power of the state.
And what makes these bodies so important is their core mission. They're specifically designed to be independent, to operate without any government interference, without fear or favor. Their entire job is to make sure the promises in the Constitution are kept and that the government is held accountable to the people. You could say they're the system's ultimate fail-safes. Now, you might look at this blueprint from 1950 and think it's just frozen in time, but it's not at all. In fact, it's been amended over 100 times. And that's not a weakness. It's actually one of its greatest strengths. It proves that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, one that can adapt and evolve as the country changes. And that really brings us to the big question to leave you with. This framework, this blueprint, has steered India for more than 75 years through some pretty incredible challenges and massive changes. So the question for us today is, how does this 75-year-old blueprint, with its deep principles and complex structures, hold up against the crazy, fast-paced challenges of the 21st century? That's definitely something worth thinking about.